I actually am very out of practice with a lot of this stuff.
No, you don't get to say that. You don't get to say that after doing that.
Today we're taking a look at several things you can learn how to do if you aren't allowed to leave your house for a while. I'm pretty sure there are several people out there who feel like they can't leave their house right now for some reason.
Odd.
Some mysterious, unknown, unnamed reason. And today we wanted to go over a few different skills that you can learn while you're stuck at home. Here's the basic idea. We're going to go over several skills that you can learn if you've got a little bit of extra time on your hands, and maybe if you can't leave the house. Some of these are very useful to learn, and some of them are just for fun. So we've got a few of them, and they should take different amounts of time to learn. So it's not like you can knock all of this out in a single afternoon.
But one of these you might be able to learn in a day, while another one could take a little while, but you can get it.
Interestingly, she picked up the puzzle cube, which is probably the fastest one to learn here.
What?
Well,
I watched Nate do this
but
in about 2 minutes, guys. I'm gonna scramble it now, and we're gonna see if he can do it again.
This puzzle cube, this is the Rubiks Cube brand. If you've never seen these before, a bunch of cubes, they all twist and slide around, it becomes a puzzle, you have to rearrange it and solve it. I'm not going to be showing you how to solve one today because while it is something you can learn in a decently short amount of time, it's not something that you can learn in about 2 minutes. You can learn to solve it in 2 minutes. So I learned this 10, 15 years ago. It took an hour, hour and a half for me to learn as someone was teaching me. And what I learned is probably the slowest method of solving it. There are people out there who can solve Rubik's Cube in like 12 seconds. Even the slowest way that I'm going to be using, I still can usually solve it in about 2 minutes, something like that. There are lots of tutorials on this, so I'll solve this right now. All of the speed cubers out there can judge me on my terrible technique, the fact that I'm using this brand of cube, and the fact that I'm just using like the slowest methods to solve everything, but it's fine.
Go. 2 minutes, 8 seconds.
So there you go, solving Rubik's Cube. Everyone who does like competitive speed cubing or really tries for the shorter times knows much better patterns and algorithms than I do. This is just, I think, about the easiest one to learn. There are tons of these tutorials all over online, and this is something you can learn to do in like 2 hours. In my experience, there's little to no actual life benefit from knowing this.
It's very impressive. Like somebody has a Rubik's Cube on their counter, you pick it up, you put it back, and it's fixed and you freak everybody out.
It's not even stickers anymore, they've upgraded, which is unfortunate for some people who wanted to just peel the stickers off and stick them onto the other sides. But this actually has like plastic panels on it, so I'm impressed at the advance in the Rubiks brand cubes. This is one that you can learn maybe not in an hour, but in a couple of days you can really pick up quite a bit, and maybe you can pick it up. This is just juggling. If you don't know how to juggle, it doesn't take very long. So today we're just gonna go over the very basics of how to juggle. I believe this is fountain, and then shower is where they actually go in a circle like they juggle in cartoons, which is much harder to actually juggle, but much easier to draw. So I think that's why they do it in cartoons. Yeah, the going in a circle is not so common. Usually the normal juggling pattern is a lot more of a figure 8 than it is a circle. All right, so learning how to juggle. First step, get 3 of something that is the same size and the same weight. It's gonna be a lot easier to learn. I highly recommend something that's squishy and soft, like bean bags, because that way, if you're learning and you drop them, hacky sacks are great. That way, if you're learning and you drop them, they don't roll away from you. So tennis balls are easy to get your hands on, but they're kind of bouncy and they're very round, so if you drop them, you're gonna be chasing them all over unless you're like juggling in a corner on a very soft carpet or something like that. So I do recommend—
Worst case scenario, get a bag of rice and get some old socks and just stuff the toes of socks.
Yep.
They work as makeshift hacky sacks, but they're not gonna roll away. And if you can't leave your house, that's gonna be a heck of a lot easier. Go to your sock drawer, get some of those mismatched socks, fill them with beans or rice or something.
Yep, that will absolutely work. That's a great way to do it if you don't have anything like bean bags. So, I mean, the first step, if you really want to go back to the very basics, is take one—
I'm gonna learn as we go.
And just toss it hand to hand. I will say it is necessary that you have enough coordination to toss a ball from one hand to the other.
Without looking.
No, you can go ahead and look.
This is the opposite of how you learn how to dance. I am not going to be teaching that today.
What you do want to do with 2, however, is get in the habit of throwing one up in the air as though it's going to the other hand, and then before it lands, throwing the other to the other hand. So like this. Just that. You throw one and then the other, and then you catch them both. 1, 1, catch, catch. 1, 1, catch, catch.
Okay, 1, 1, catch, catch. Try and throw them close. Okay, what am I doing wrong?
You're just not throwing the second one high.
This one needs to go higher.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, you want to do that.
Now I get why they have to be hacky sacks.
You want to do that until you can throw both of them fairly evenly, about the same height, over and over. And this is where it really is just practice. Practice? And it's why it's not something you can learn in 10 minutes. It's a weird thing to train your brain to do. But you will get there. So from that point, once you can reliably, from starting with either hand, that's when you want to move on to a third one. And you do not have to just suddenly go into constantly keeping it moving. Your goal at this point is to throw 1, 2, 3, and even catching them is secondary at this point. Your goal is just to concentrate on getting all 3 throws. So like 1, 2, 3. And you want to make sure that all 3 throws are going in the right direction toward the hand and about the same height. Shoot for about eye level. So you're just going 1, 2, 3. And then switch hands, 1, 2, 3. You just want to get used to tossing them in that pattern, in that distance, in that order. When I'm doing this, I go 1, 2, 3, and I get kind of like 2 in one spot, 1 in the other, about underneath where my hands were. So next, after you get like the 3 tosses, is to try and do the 3 tosses and 3 catches. Don't keep going, but just 1, 2, 3. You're watching this not in full real time, but almost in real time. Callie has not spent 30 minutes practicing the first toss. She spent 1 minute practicing the first toss. And it will probably take a little bit more practice before she gets into full juggling here. Once you can do the toss and catch, then it's time to start getting into actually keeping it going. It's the exact same pattern because the first one that I throw ends up in this hand. And so it's just gonna get tossed again. That's the whole point of juggling. You catch it and then you just re-throw it. We've got one more pretty much useless skill. And this one, there's not a lot of teaching I can do. I can just demonstrate and say, keep trying. That's a few different times on this show. I have spun things on my finger, and I'm gonna show you how I learned that. First, I got a decently large paperback book. This is not the book I learned with, it's just similar. I got a paperback book, it's not a hardcover, and I just took some tape and I taped it closed. So I've just got Scotch tape. I recommend the softcover book for a couple reasons. One, the little bit extra give that it will have is actually going to be helpful, I think, in learning the balance. And 2, it will hurt a little bit less if you smack yourself in the face. It's fairly straightforward. Basically, you just put your finger near the middle of the book, and then I'm spinning it toward myself. So looking down on it from the top, counterclockwise if I'm right-handed. And honestly, the only advice I have is to keep trying. I do recommend you keep your fingernails clipped short enough that they aren't going to hit the book, partly because that might hurt and partly because your fingernail will dig circles into the cover of the book. And then, once you've learned how, you can do this, which will not benefit your life probably in any way ever, but it's
cool
fun.
Party trick.
Yep.
A month to learn, you say. Okay, so what if you do if your coworker's dead? Ah! Don't do that. Guys, there are courses.
Right. Yeah, no, that's the TV.
Oh, look, I did it.
TV
Woo!
does not teach you proper CPR, but
there are courses online, guys.
that's right. There are lots of official courses, like the Red Cross has a course on CPR you can take online. You're taught by like professionals who actually know what they're doing, and you're not just watching TV and guessing based on that.
Because guys, you only have 2 minutes to harvest the organ.
Wait, no organ harvesting. That's Red Cross does not recommend that. Let's learn about soldering, and you have been learning about this very recently.
I just learned how to solder, which is a little embarrassing given my age, but you know what? It's a fun and useful skill to have.
So soldering is where you use heat and metal to meld wires together. It's not the same as welding, which would actually get so hot that it melted the wires, but it's heating the wire up, adding a type of metal that has basically, it's called flux, but it's basically metal glue. It helps it all bond together better. and you just bond metal around all of the wires. It's the best way to get a connection between wires. It's going to hold really well. It's going to conduct electricity really, really well. And so if you can solder wires, it's a good thing to solder them in a lot of situations.
In the past, I have actually, twisted wires together in a little bit of electrical tape, and in a pinch, you can do that, but it's a lot nicer if you can learn how to solder. When you're learning, there's a few different types of solder that you can use. Solder with flux, solder without it. You can buy flux on its own. There's also the difference between just a regular silver solder or some with lead in it, so make sure that you're checking out which one it is you're using. So we're not actually soldering anything important together today. We are just soldering some little electrical wires. So if you've ever seen a wire like this in any of your electronics, it's not one solid wire. It's all of these tiny little copper strands twisted together inside it. To solder two wires together, simplest part is you strip the wires so that you have both ends exposed. Then what you're going to do is you're going to untwist the copper strands so that they're a little bit looser on both sides. And then you're going to gently shove them together. It's about the best way I can put that. Try and intertwine them as much as possible. Try not to bend any of them. And then smoosh them down together. And now you're going to twist until you get as smooth of a connection as you can. Now this itself would already conduct electricity, but it's not very secure. So now we're going to add that solder to give it a slightly more permanent bond. Now you can set this on a surface and solder it, but that surface is going to burn. You can try and prop it up on something. I have something here called the helping hand. It's not necessary, but boy does it help. So you use these little clamps to hold everything in place while you get your soldering iron. Now, while this is an incredibly useful skill to have, it's pretty obvious you do need some equipment for it. Namely, you're going to need that flux, a soldering iron. So this here is my Dremel soldering iron, and there's several different types. You can have a plug-in one. There's different tools for auto soldering, things like that. This one is really good for delicate detail work, smaller things. It's not going to solder anything huge together, but that's okay. You don't want the soldering iron to ever actually touch your solder or your flux. That's not going to be necessary. You're going to take your soldering iron and you're going to put it underneath the wires here. The idea is that the wires themselves heat up so much that the flux is just going to melt down into them. So you just want to be patient and heat your wires. Set the solder just very gently, just have it rest on top of those copper wires that are all twisted together. So that right there sitting on top, that would be called the cold solder, and that's not going to do enough. So we're going to keep it here until it all starts to melt down into the wires themselves. So you can sort of see where the wires are starting to turn silvery. It's melting down in between all of those wires and forming a more permanent connection. What you don't want is for it to just bead up along the top of the surface. That's not going to help you much. So once you have that connection, you're pretty much good to go. You can wrap it with electrical tape. You can leave it bare if you want.
Depending on the use.
Yeah, maybe for some things, don't leave the wires bare. So electrical tape will work, but if you have it, or you have access to it, heat shrink tubing. Measure out just enough to cover to the plastic that's covering the rest of your wiring. Slide it on over your solder. Take a lighter or a torch, whatever you've got, and it just shrinks right over the wire, giving you a secure and safe connection.
One more skill that you can learn, which you may not actually need while you're quarantined and locked in your house, but it's good to know ahead of time, and practice is a good thing, is learning how to change or rotate your tires. Changing a tire would be if you got a flat and you need to put the spare on. Rotating your tires means you take the back tires and you put them on the front, and the front tires and you put them on the back, at least when all of your tires are identical, which most cars these days have. If you have a car with the front tires where they're a different size than the back tires, you usually just swap them. So rotating your tires helps to get more even tread wear. Your tires aren't going to wear down in one spot exclusively. You know, very few cars have a 100% perfect alignment, so tires are going to wear a little bit differently on each axle, and by switching where they are, you're going to change, what spots are wearing down, and you extend the tire's life by a good bit. That way you don't have to replace your tires as often, and it's really nice. And then also, if you are ever in an emergency and you need to change your tire, it's very good to know how to do that on your car.
The worst time to learn that you don't know how to change a tire on your car is when you have a flat. So make sure you've actually practiced it once or twice before that happens.
Very true. Let's take a look at my car. Now, most cars are going to have a spot where you're supposed to attach a jack. On mine, I both have a picture on the jack pointing to where that is, and I can just see it. It's this extra panel of steel sticking down. So just by using my hand, I got the jack into place and I twisted it up until it's like on the support. It's not really doing anything to lift the car at this point, but it is just holding itself in place. So next, what we're going to want to do is before we lift the car, we want to loosen the lug nuts on the wheel quite a bit, because otherwise once it's up and then we have to pull really hard on the tire iron to get those lug nuts off, it could be shaking the car and it could even drop it down off of the jack. I should also point out that you want to make sure you have your parking brake on while you do this.
All right, so once you have the tire on and you're getting ready to tighten all the bolts, you want to remember that you don't want to tighten the bolts in a circle. You want to crisscross, almost like you're trying to make that shape of a star, just to make sure that everything's tightening evenly.
I'm gonna start with this one, just put it on a little bit tighter. I'm gonna go down here, that a little tighter, go up to this one, a little tighter. All right, then I go back to the first one and tighten it a little bit more. So that's on there pretty tight.
Nice.
So I'm now going to lower the jack back down, and then I will do a final check tightening all of the lug nuts once it's on the ground and not at risk for tipping the car. There we go. I've now put the spare tire on my car. I don't need to put the spare tire on my car right now. My regular tire is in great condition, but that's the whole point, is that this is something you can learn and practice right now. And honestly, if I'm not recording for the camera, the whole process only takes like 10 or 15 minutes. It's not that long and it's not that hard for most vehicles, but it's a great idea to check what the process is for your car and actually do the whole process. Switch your spare on, take it back off, put the real tire back on, learn how to use the tools, and then if you have an emergency where you got a flat tire and it's cold and rainy outside, at least you don't have to spend 45 minutes figuring out what you're doing. So it's excellent time to practice. If you have a car and a place, like just a parking spot that you can practice this in, I'd highly recommend that, assuming it's your car. If it's not your car, make sure you get permission from whoever's car it is. Guys, I hope you have a chance to learn some of these skills and that in some way they benefit your life. That's it for today, but we've always got more to see. If you like this kind of stuff, hit that button to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a cool video. See you in the next one.